Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Hayes. I am the owner and founder of Pathfinder Global Solutions, and I am here with Dr. Chontel Parker. Dr. Chontel Parker is affectionately known as Doc Phoenix. She is a free-spirited nudist, certified sexologist, kink educator, and a liberation guide. She hosts the podcast Pleasure Prescriptions, Doc Phoenix Sensual Sessions, and creates transformative experience through workshops, play parties, and upscale kink events. She is passionate about pleasure, healing, and self-expression, and she helps others to explore their sexuality, their spirituality, and the science of sex and authentic connection. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. So, Chantel is going to be one of the wonderful instructors that's going to be teaching a module at the Pleasure Prescribed virtual retreat, June 20th through 22nd. And so, I want to introduce you all to her. And Chantel, I would like you to talk a little bit about how you got started. How did you become Dr. Chantel Parker and affectionately known as Doc Phoenix? What's your story?
All right, my story is I guess Dr. Chontel Parker became before all of it. And
Okay.
so did my company, Phoenix Flight. I always knew that I wanted a PhD. My background is in education, so rightfully I just went along that path.
Right.
But I will say that sex has always been like very important to me, and I've
Mhm.
always been very curious about it
Mhm.
ever since I was like a little girl. But I
Yeah.
went through the traditional route, got my undergrad, master's, PhD, all in education. My
Mhm.
last year working on my dissertation, I took
Yeah.
this class, like this health class,
Uh-huh.
and I found out that I could be like a sex educator. And I'm like, what? Here I am with a terminal degree, and this is something I
Yes.
would enjoy doing, but I'm too far gone at this point.
Yeah.
So I would say that was more so when the formal seed was planted. But I went along, I'm in education. I will continue with this. And then I
Right.
realized that there were alternative routes in order to do stuff still within the realm of sexuality. And
Okay.
so I found out coaching, I found like sex therapists, but that meant more schooling. So I did find this program
Hmm.
and I focused on sex education. It's like a non-protective field or coaching per se. I
Okay.
really got into that and then I furthered my education and became a sexologist. And that has been my non-traditional path in here, but I love learning. I love studying. I'm definitely like a didactic learner. Psychology, I love. So all of these
Hmm.
things I have been studying all along, but now having this specialty in this area, I just get to dive a little bit deeper and figure out all the nuances of it. And so I am thoroughly enjoying
Yes.
it. And I have been a sex educator for the last 3 years and then sexologist 2 years.
So about 5 years total practicing everything.
Yeah, about
Okay.
yeah, around that. Like as far as my personal journey, and then getting
Yeah.
really into the business and the certifications of this particular area. Yes.
Yes. Okay. I love that story. I love how you got started. One thing I want to talk about is in your work, you talk a lot about liberation and you talk about, sexual health and wellness and everything like that. The lessons that you are going to be including is some of the body truths.
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean when you talk about body truth myths?
Led to believe like one thing as a
Right.
truth, and that's not true.
Hmm.
You have things that hold true for you. I have things that hold true for me. Whose truth is
Right.
right? And so when we consider like body and body standards, there's, depending on where you are, there's usually a global truth, like, depending on exactly where you are, time, date, location, or whatever. And we
Right.
know that this changes. So that lets us know that when we look at beauty, that's not a truth in itself. We've all
Hmm.
heard beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Now,
Right.
of course, we look at some things and there are some traditional, beauty standards that we look at. But
Right.
again, with that, it varies from
It
time and
does.
place, you know?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
we get so caught up in those things that are considered to be like these traditional norms or norms based on whatever, and we don't always see ourselves in that. But that doesn't mean that we're not beautiful in different ways in our own right or whatever. So just kind of getting away from what status quo says or what maybe the world or this time and place tells us is beautiful or the correct body standard, which is not a
Oh,
thing. But
yes.
it's sold to us daily. We see
Right.
it all the time. What
Mhm.
we would consider conventionally or traditionally beautiful, or bodies that are conventionally attractive. But just realizing like what's beautiful about you, how strong you are, what your body does for you on a day-to-day basis, how it just supports you. So
Hmm.
getting more into that.
Yeah, I love that because so many times, like we're looking in the mirror, like, oh, I wish I had a little more of this, a little less of that, and we forget like how much our body does to support us every day, and what has gotten us through over the years and our journey, and how powerful that is, and living with that.
Correct. And I'm glad you said journey because it is something that's a constant. As
Hmm.
free as I am, like I just left
Hmm.
Jamaica last week where I got to be nude for
Yeah,
the whole week. Like I
I
didn't
saw
have to wear.
your post. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go.
You have to go.
But
I
it's
didn't have.
it's it's like I've always wanted to go, but I still have this fear. And it's a weird thing. It's like I'm okay with other people's nakedness,
Mhm.
but my own, it's like, oh no, 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 I can't do that. But I will root for you and support you, like, yes, go for it. But me, on the other hand, it's like, oh no, I'm not ready yet.
And you get that often, and we look at
Yeah,
people because I can recognize traditional norms. Like, I'm a big girl. I've always been a big girl. I don't hate my
mhm.
body by any means,
Of course
but
not.
we can always look at our bodies and pick out, like you said, like, oh, my breasts aren't as perky as I want them to be, or my stomach's hang a little bit longer, or this
Hmm.
arm looks so big, or my butt looks funny from that. So we can look at ourselves and pick ourselves apart,
Right.
and oftentimes talk ourselves out of it. Because I look at people
Hmm.
who people would consider conventionally fine, or like, whatever. And
Hmm.
they're like, I couldn't do what you do. I couldn't ride the streets of New Orleans or wherever in a naked bike ride. I
Yeah.
couldn't walk around this resort. And I'm looking at you like, yes, you can. But we all have these truths
Yes.
that come up in our minds. And that is why I'm so passionate about what I do. Because
Yeah.
oftentimes people will look at me and they're
Hmm.
like, oh, I'm rooting for you. I'm glad you could do it. You have all the confidence. But I'm like, you can do that thing too.
Yeah.
And so sometimes even just looking at me and seeing me do it gives people that permission to say, I can do it too. And
Hmm.
forever, it takes work. There's some things that
Right.
I may not be so comfortable with. And it
Hmm.
just takes that work and it takes time. And it may not be something you're comfortable with. That may not be your form of
Yeah.
liberation.
Right.
But that seed has at least been planted because you're like, I want to do it. And
Yes.
one day you will do it sooner than later.
Baby steps, baby steps,
Baby steps.
baby steps.
And I do give people baby steps too. So yeah.
Yes, I love that. So we're talking about the liberation and everything. So just how do you go about, I guess, letting people know kind of, liberation looks different for everyone, like you were
Mhm.
saying. What is your process to kind of guiding people, like those little baby steps that we need to take to figure out what does liberation feel like for me as, your individual liberation?
So a lot of times people will come and say, I wish that I could do this thing.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, we'll take nudity, for example.
Hmm.
I can easily jump and say, hey, book your trip to the resort, but you just stop me and you say baby steps. So first of all, it takes
Yeah.
listening. It takes
Hmm.
seeing what that person wants to achieve, what they're comfortable with, what
Hmm.
they're actually doing now. So it's some form of assessment. It may not
Yeah.
necessarily be formal, but in conversation, I may
Hmm.
find out that you can't even look at yourself in the mirror. You
Hmm.
know,
Okay.
and that happens for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
listening, just doing that informal type assessment, sometimes it takes digging a little bit deeper because some of us have trauma, like untapped
Right.
trauma, that can
Hmm.
come in different forms. And trauma doesn't always come by way of like sexual assault or anything physical. It could be those
Right.
mental roadblocks that we have or things that
Hmm.
have happened to us. And sometimes it takes going a little bit deeper than me, like something outside of my scope. So
Yeah.
just doing those informal type assessments, seeing where
Hmm.
the person is, seeing where they want to be,
Yeah.
and where they are at this point, and how we can get past that. And
Hmm.
sometimes that takes, we may have a baseline, we may have to go back. Just like
Right.
when I'm doing assessments, we start somewhere, but it's like,
Yeah.
oh no, we need to drop back a little bit further. We need to do
Oh, I like
this, and
that.
that. And it may be consulting somebody else in a
Hmm.
different, discipline to say,
Yeah.
hey, this is a lot of trauma that we need to unpack before you can get here. So just listening, doing that
Gotcha.
assessment, having that person do a self-assessment, and let's
Hmm.
just, work with them to see how we can go from there.
Yeah, I like that, creating that roadmap so you're on a journey and like letting people know it looks different for all of us.
And it can
It's not
change.
right. Yeah, especially like as you get older, it's like, oh no, that was in my 20s. I'm a little bit older now. Can't do that, or I don't
Yeah,
want to do that.
yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. So what are, you talked about trauma being one of those things. What are other roadblocks that you have found in the people that you work with? Just roadblocks to getting them to a point where they do feel a little bit more liberated in their body, in their sexuality. What are more of those roadblocks that you've seen throughout your coaching sessions?
I would say two things that come to mind immediately. One is
Yeah.
that people don't know that they have permission to be their most authentic selves. Like we all
Oh,
come from different backgrounds. Somebody may have never been able to use their voice, and you may look and say, "Well, you are a 35-year-old person. Like, how do you not know what you want?" Well, nobody ever made me think about it. Nobody ever told me I could do this. I didn't see people doing this where I came from. I
right.
didn't know this was an option. And a lot of times we'll take things for granted because we live in our bodies and our space and we have our own points of reference and experiences, but this
Mm-hmm.
person doesn't have that. So just not even knowing that you
Yeah.
have the capability. And also, I think about just comparison being the thief of joy. So people look at me and they're like, oh, you're so free. You do this, you do that. Like I could never, or I wish I could, and understanding, not really noticing that our journeys are very different. Like there are
Right.
things that you are doing, like parenthood. That's not my journey. That's
Yeah.
not my mission. That's not my form of liberation. But I can
Yeah.
look at parents and admire what they do and
I feel the
say,
same
like,
way. Hmm.
if you can do this very
Yeah.
hard thing, because it takes a
Yes.
lot, like you are much stronger and you are more confident than you even know. So
Hmm.
just kind of like getting rid of all of those little things in our head that tell us you can't, whether it's looking and saying, you are so liberated, you are so free, you can do
Yeah.
this and that. I can't. You can, but your
Yes.
journey doesn't necessarily have to look like mine. We all have our roadmap. We all have our plans. We all have our different destinations.
Yeah.
Just get on yours. And I'm
I
gonna run
like
mine the
that.
way I see fit and change it accordingly.
Yeah.
But you can do yours the way you want it to.
Yeah.
So having that permission
I like
and
that.
just moving beyond all that noise in your head.
Yeah. I like what you said, the permission. I don't think I've heard anyone say that part, like the reason why I don't feel like I can get to this next level or feel liberated is because I never had permission. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the conversations that you've had around discovering the permissions that people need to get to in order to get to that level of liberation?
I can. I will say just from my background and
Hmm.
just speaking on me and how I feel like permission came from me. My
Yeah.
family has been okay and it's still okay. My mom, my dad, my close family, even my nephews, they know what I do. So
Oh,
to me,
nice.
it
Okay.
may not always be a verbal permission,
Right.
but the fact that my parents can support things that I do. My
Hmm.
mom is walking around and saying, Chantel at that naked bike ride. I talked to her just yesterday and she's like, yeah, she went to some freaky place or something. Like that's how she puts it. But the fact that we can
Yeah.
have that open
Hmm.
conversation lets me know that I don't have to hide who I am.
Right. And I
And
love that
not
for you.
everybody has that. Some
Yeah.
people come from smaller places where expressing their sexuality or even
Hmm.
things like being nude, like I can't do this.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm from the South. You know, Bible Belt, we always hear that, as
Yep.
cliche as it sounds, but
It is.
if you're raised in a certain time, place, certain religions, you're told you can't do certain things.
Right.
Sex is for the purpose of procreation between a man and a woman. It's supposed to look a certain way. Anything
Hmm.
else is perverse. So that right there is telling you you don't
Right.
have permission to be your true self.
Mm.
So just things like that. It may
Yeah.
not always be I didn't, nobody told me I could. It may have been things that somebody told you you couldn't, and you just stuck with that, and it never changed. You
Hmm.
never unlearned that. So seeing people who are out
Yeah.
doing things or being kinky or being free, it's like, wait, what? I can do
Like, what
this?
is this?
You would, I felt that way. I didn't know that I can actually
Yeah.
do this. So
Hmm.
sometimes permission does come verbally, and
Yeah.
just that
Okay.
you can, or seeing people doing it. So
Yeah.
permission comes in different ways. And
Okay.
I,
It
I
is.
love
Okay.
seeing when that little spark is unlocked and it's like, wait, I can do this? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Because I know for me, just like some of these words, like I had heard of the word kink before, but I had
Mhm.
never dived in to see like what is that? And when I looked at it and like kind of went down the rabbit hole, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I wanted to learn more. And then I meet you and you were like, well, yeah, there's these, the nudity part of it. And I was just like, oh. And what's so strange for me is like I kind of started that with the Korean spas.
Hmm.
The Korean spas, most of them are nude. And so I remember the first time I went to one, and I mean, they give you these little small towels. They're covering nothing, but I felt comfortable by having that little towel and holding it up, on my chest and on my bum and walking around. And I would see the other ladies, they were just so free and
Hmm.
walking around just like nothing. And I always admired that. And so when I met you and like we're talking about the liberation, we're talking about the levels of nudity and getting to that part where you're liberated and also the permission, all of that together. I love these conversations and how you are building that roadmap that we can all kind of use to get and figure out what our liberation journey is.
Oh, and I will go back just a little bit.
Yeah.
When I first started, because I'm still in education.
Yes.
So I couldn't be as free and liberated as I wanted to be with my professional, I guess I would say transitioning.
Yeah.
So I started out, I'm like, what can you do that fulfills what you want to do, but whatever. So I was like, I'm going to be a liberation guide. Like
Yeah.
that's not a
Okay.
real thing per se, but I find
Yeah.
that, like I said, everything looks different for everybody. So
Hmm.
there's some things we need to free up that we need to be liberated from before we can even do this other thing. So no matter
Right.
where I go, what area I go, whether it's in the sex, sexuality, nudity, whatever, there is
Hmm.
some form of liberation that needs to be tackled in order to, like, we need to scaffold. You need to feel free,
Right.
or you need to
Hmm.
have these basic needs met before you can even get to the freedom to
Yeah.
be able to do these different things. So
Right.
liberation is the foundation. So even though I'm the sexologist, liberation will always
Yeah.
have to come into play because
Yeah.
sometimes I can't do what I want to do sexually or like kink wise because
Hmm.
I don't feel free enough to do it.
And so when we're talking about liberation, is there a component of, yeah, I'm entering into this stage of liberation, but maybe in certain situations I don't feel safe?
Mhm.
So are those two things that you kind of tackle both the liberation and the safety around that?
Yes, you definitely have to feel safe because I always refer back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And
Hmm.
we know that safety is one of those bottom level needs, or,
Right.
if you don't have certain needs met, you can't move forward. So if
Hmm.
somebody is afraid of being hurt or harmed or talked about or possibly losing their jobs because they want to do whatever, then it's really hard to be able to, be your most authentic self. But there are ways around that.
Got it.
Personally, I
Okay.
like to create safe spaces for people to go
Yeah.
and to explore all of their proclivities.
Hmm.
And I've been doing that for the last 3 years now. So sometimes it may not be in your immediate space.
Right.
Sometimes you have to create those spaces where you can feel free or find
Got it.
community and people who are doing those types of things where
Hmm.
you can have. Maybe I can't go home and feel safe doing it, but for
Hmm.
this little bit of time, I can be with these people in
Yeah.
this particular place and feel
Hmm.
totally free. Or
Hmm.
I can travel and do
Right.
these things where I'm in
Hmm.
my own space around other like-minded people and be as free as
Yeah.
I want to be and now come back to this world.
Yeah.
So sometimes, safety, you may not be safe in one space,
Yeah.
but in another. But if you're not safe altogether, like I said, that's one of those things that may go a little bit beyond me because that probably indicates,
Hmm.
more trauma or something that I'm not as well equipped to deal with. But
Okay.
in a case like that, then I would want to connect them with the appropriate people to help them to
Hmm.
get past those things so that we
Right.
can get to, having that permission or
Right.
going towards your journey.
Got it. So, last question for you. What are one or two things that you want people to know about sexual health, wellness, and their journey to liberation?
All right. I think this has been the resounding theme. Everybody's looks different, even when it comes to like health and wellness. I would definitely say your mental health is important. So when
Mhm.
we talk about that, it's not just your physical health. It's not just going to, your gynecologist and checking up on that. Making sure that you are aware of your body, aware of your
Mhm.
parts, aware of how it functions, aware of how it's going to change because it's constantly changing and we're finding things and we don't talk about that a whole bunch. So making sure you get to know like who you are as a person, making
Mhm.
sure you're going to get those checkups, researching just on your own
Mhm.
and understanding that wellness is more like from a holistic standpoint. So if you aren't mentally and physically well, then there's no way you can be free or liberated because you have those things that are keeping you tethered.
Yeah.
So just making sure you're looking at it from a holistic standpoint, whether it's mentally, physically, spiritually, understanding who you are as a person, understanding your body, understand when it changes, understanding when something is not right and going to take
Mhm.
care of that, and understanding that all of that comes together and works together for you to be your most authentic and liberated self. Because if one part of your health and wellness journey is not going well, then it's definitely going to affect the other part. And we
Very
want
true.
balance as much as possible. So take care of yourself. If that means going out and taking walks and dancing and having friends and eating good food, taking time to yourself, seeking pleasure, being selfish, whatever it is that
Yes.
you need to do to keep yourself well, safe, sane, healthy, do those things.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. So,
You're welcome.
everybody, to meet Dr. Chontel Parker and experience more of her expertise, join us June 20th through 22nd for the Pleasure Prescribed virtual retreat. Thank you, Chontel.
You're welcome.